Man, how great was the Alex Smith E60 Project 11?
Inspirational guy. Inspirational.
You and I had talked about it a lot, and I think we talked about it on our podcast. Looking forward to it, but it was gruesome. Could have used a little more warning, but it was great.
It's as powerful as anything that I've seen on ESPN in that kind of format. It was
Especially for a famous guy,
fantastic.
right? For like an already famous super athlete.
Well, I think there was just the unknown. If you didn't follow the story like day by day when it was happening, I think most of us loosely did how serious it got. But the diving into the leg injury and the rehab and his attitude and where he's at now was as good as anything I've seen. Again, the word I would use, inspirational from an athlete of just being. I don't care who you are. I don't care what team you root for. You go, I respect the shit out of that guy.
Uh, this is our YouTube channel. So before we get
Yes, it
into it,
is.
just a reminder: we appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, let us know what you think about the stuff we talk about here in the comments.
Also, check out the podcast below in the description. Guy Haberman, that's him. John Middlecoff, that's me. Subscribe.
I think it's two people that uh, have watched Alex's whole career, obviously, um, starting with the 49ers and even back to college, but we're on radio. Like we were in media in the Bay Area when Alex got hurt and Colin Kaepernick replaced him. And that was such a huge story. Can you get replaced after an injury, right? Like that was such a big topic. We've
Yeah.
been talking about Alex for a long time. And I think I always felt like he was one of the mentally toughest guys that I'd watched in sports. And obviously, this injury is on another level, but just what he went through as far as being the number one overall pick, like having all that pressure, the organization was an absolute disaster. He had 5 coordinators in 5 years. You remember he had that 1 year with Norv, and it was good. Then Norv Turner got a job as a head coach of the Chargers. 5 coordinators in 5 years. You remember that Singletary? You and I talk about this one all the time, where like Singletary had David Carr warming up on the sideline just because he wanted to see how tough Alex, like if Alex could handle seeing the other quarterback warm up. He went through a lot of shit and came out better for the 49ers, has the situation with Kaepernick, so he's gone, goes to the Chiefs, is great with the Chiefs, just happens they draft Mahomes, goes to he was 6-4 when he got hurt in Washington. But just the injury aside, right? Like wasn't this guy one of the mentally toughest guys that you'd watched over that period of time in the NFL?
You're leaving out an element too. There was an elephant in the room of when he went number one overall, and then 5, 6 years later, when his career was still in peril before Harbaugh showed up, Aaron Rodgers had became Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
They kick out Brett Favre for him. He leads his team to a Super Bowl. Then the year when Jim shows up, he wins the MVP.
Oh no, hold on. I'll jump right there. I'll add something. You just reminded me of something else. The Rodgers part's probably the big part, but Harbaugh shows up. Alex doesn't have a contract, remember? It's coming
Well,
off the lockout, and Alex is leading team workouts even though he's not under contract. Player workouts.
I was working with the Philadelphia Eagles front office at the time. We were prepared to make Alex Smith the highest paid backup in the league. We had Michael Vick, but he had been getting banged up a little bit. And as you can tell, who loved him? Andy Reid
Yeah.
loved Alex Smith. Loved Alex Smith. And I think at the time in 2011, we're going to prepare to pay him like $4 or $5 million. That was 10 years ago. That would probably be more than inflation what Mariota got
Right.
this year. So that who knows? But Jim talked him into it. Jim, to me, deserves a lot of credit for getting the trains back on the tracks.
Mm-hmm.
He started playing good football. He had the historic moment against the Saints in the playoffs. And then to me, Andy took his career to another level, and Alex admitted that. He said the Chiefs changed my life was the statement he used in there. And one thing that really stood out to me, and it's not just quarterbacks, but quarterbacks go through this, and I think historically they have, but I think a lot of players do. When you have really good coaches in football that believe in you, it shows you the sky's the limit when you are a really talented player. Now, Alex isn't talented like Brett Favre or Mahomes, but he's a playoff level quarterback.
Yeah.
And once he got with the right guys, once he got with a team that knew what they were doing and a coach that knew what they were doing, it made him a credible player in the league. And I think depending on who you ask, you could argue he's one of the more underappreciated players of the last 10 years because all he did was win once he got real coaches.
Yeah.
All he did was win.
Yeah. I know. I would argue he was. I mean, he goes 13-3 with Harbaugh year one, right? Because they went from a 3-win team to a 13-win team, I think, like that.
Yeah.
Then he's a 6 He's 6-2-1. I'm just looking at it now. When he gets hurt, he's 5 years in Kansas City. They have 4 seasons in which they win 10 games or more. 3 seasons in which he wins 11 games. No, I would agree with you. I think he's underrated. Again, in part because he was left for dead. It was a total disaster, and he overcame it.
I wonder, and Urban Meyer talked about it in the documentary, that he reiterated Harbaugh's thoughts about he's one of the toughest players he'd ever been. Jim Harbaugh called him the toughest. There's an element of mental toughness
Tougher than
to
a
him.
$2 steak.
It just is. It moves you emotionally watching the video or the documentary on his rehab, because I don't think a lot of humans, football players, non-football players, could have handled it the way he handled it, and his positive attitude. It was remarkable to see. But really, when you take a step back, you're like, of course, Alex handled this as well as humanly possible. Like that's kind of who he is. And I think it started like how he endured those, rough 49er years before Jim Harbaugh got here. Most guys are out of the league, right? Or most guys are just get eaten alive and kind of tap out.
You know what's funny? On our last podcast, we talked about like the longest quarterback can stay in one place without having a ton of success. And we didn't talk about Alex. I was thinking about it after the fact. I'm like, God, we should have talked about Alex because they kept trying to replace him. But it was like Sean Hill is here for the quarterback battle, right? Or JT O'Sullivan might get a shot. Like
Trent Dilfer.
They couldn't
Carr.
replace him. But it wasn't because he was great. It was just they just couldn't get somebody good enough to beat him out with any consistency. And when does that ever end with a guy just putting it all together like he did? And you're right. I mean, maybe Harbaugh does have, in some ways, an expiration date when he gets to a place. He just wears people out, whatever. But he was, and by the end, remember, like Staley was worn out of him, like high level. But he was the right guy at the right time and built up Alex's confidence because it brought it out. It did bring it out in Alex, right? Just like Urban brought it out in him, just like Andy brought it out in him. We're constantly having these conversations like, would Brady be Brady without Belichick? Or would Aaron Rodgers be Aaron Rodgers if the roles had been reversed? What would have happened? And it would have been hard for Aaron, right?
I don't even know if this stuff exists anymore, but back us 80s babies, when you were applying to a job, sometimes you get a reference letter. To me, depending on the industry, who's on your reference letter does matter. And Alex Smith's reference letter would include 3 people at the top. Start with Urban Meyer, it would go to Jim Harbaugh, and then it would be Andy Reid. So right. I think the people that support you in whatever industry you're at and sing your praises says something about who you are. Like, you can nitpick Harbaugh all you want. It gets a little harder to nitpick the other 2, right? I mean, I think that speaks to Alex Smith, the player, how capable he is, because he's physically doesn't have the greatest arm, but the good coaches use it just fine.
Yeah.
They're winning big-time games. They're producing as the number 1 pick to go from where he became with Andy Reid by his last season guy. His last season for the Chiefs, 26 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. And they talked about in the documentary, he had his best season when Patrick Mahomes, who was clear was going to replace him, was sitting right there. It was clear what was going to happen. It was inevitable, whether it was the following year or in 2 years. Best season ever. To me, as much as the sitting with the wounded warriors who've had their limbs blown off, this guy had a football injury that became the equivalent. The Secretary of Defense had to give him clearance to go to this area in San Antonio, because that's how bad his leg injury was. And he kind of got led there because he got replaced by a young guy. Now, it was justified, big picture. But this guy, 26-5, remember, he kind of got crushed when Washington paid him a lot of money. He was kind of worth it at the time. Like, he was good. Yeah, where do you find a player, and just speaks to where I think the casual football fan holds him into a level that might not be the same that the NFL held him to.
Yeah.
In terms of the NFL liked him more than like a fan base did.
But I think by the end, Niner fans really respected him. Like, really. And I don't know if that's what he was looking for, but one thing that I liked about watching this, beyond just how he overcame the leg injury, was just watching him and thinking, this guy is totally comfortable and at ease with how his career played out, right? With the fact that the struggles, the number 1 pick, Aaron Rodgers, like, I was happy to watch him and not get any impression that, like, Aaron Rodgers' shadow hangs over Alex Smith. Like, there's not any of that. And it shouldn't, because he had I mean, by almost every standard, beyond a really good NFL career. Like, better than really good.
I also think him going through some of the worst times ever and getting changes the Niners, leads them to the NFC Championship game after a terrible decade, goes to the Chiefs, helps them. When he showed up, they had the #1 overall pick. And then, like you said, 11 wins 3 times. They're going to the playoffs all the time. They were not the Patrick Mahomes Chiefs yet. And then you get pushed out again, helped him in a much more serious note when his leg was going through, might have to be cut off. That attitude and that mindset is something, again, that I think any human could try to emulate just when things are going bad. Nowhere near the level of you might lose your leg, to keep a positive mindset, to keep your head up, to keep battling through. And I think Alex Smith is just, if he never, I mean, he probably won't ever play football again. Whatever he chooses to do, it's impossible for. I would bet the house on this guy.
Yeah. There was the scene, right, where I think his wife tells the story of him in the hospital, like after a lot of this stuff had happened, telling her like, we are lucky, like we are not feeling sorry for ourselves, like we're lucky that we've made it as far as we've made it, and he's had some unlucky things happen to him, but one thing that you do come away watching this is the fact that he still has his leg after the infection, which is just, I felt like I was watching a war documentary about like the war of like a war of 1812. Like this is the shit that used to happen. Ugh. But that he had to have 7 different surgeries to keep going in and cutting out the flesh-eating bacteria. Just say that. It's just. But for him to even be thinking about trying to make an NFL comeback is pretty. Like that is, whether he does or not. Like that is.
Yeah,
an incredible
speaks
testament
to him.
his
that speaks to
mental
where
toughness.
I completely agree. I think he's everything that's good about the NFL. To be honest with you, it's not always as easy as it looks. And it's not a lot of guys that could get washed out that are quote, you don't get your 5th-year option picked up. You got to get traded. Like it's easy to tap out, or I'm getting screwed, or poor me. And he just did not have that mindset. To me, that last year with Kansas City when Mahomes was there, and what Andy Reid and Matt Nagy and Mahomes said. I mean, we've been talking about for years about the Favre-Rodgers relationship. It doesn't always have to be like that. Right? You can be a professional. They say be a pro, which every human knows is easier said than done.
Yeah.
And whatever you do, act professionally. Well, when you're mad, and for him to treat a guy with the highest level of respect, when you know that guy's going to take your job, what percentage of humans, pro athletes, normal humans, have that in them? Wouldn't you say it'd be pretty low?
Yeah, I mean,
I have to look myself in the mirror in that same situation. I don't know.
Well, I read something the other day about Steve Young. You just did a thing on was that Draft Night with Steve Young on TV?
Yeah.
And Steve is, I think his last year at BYU was 83, and he goes to play in the USFL and becomes one of the highest paid football players ever, at least by the total value of the contract, which included an annuity, which the league folded and the thing fell apart. But at the time, that was the pressure he was under, right? In the offseason after his first USFL season, he goes back to BYU to finish up school. BYU that year is 84. BYU goes undefeated and wins the national championship. And Steve Young's like, God, kind of jealous, right? He kind of wishes he had been there. He wishes I had won the national championship in 84. Now, that's not standing there and watching it, but that is a guy who's happy for his friends, but still a part of him is like, I wish that had been me. Here's Alex, who watches Colin Kaepernick lead the team to the Super Bowl. And you and I remember it. Like, he was what he said he was, what everyone says he was, which was a great teammate, did everything to try and help Colin. And the same deal, as you said, with Mahomes. We've seen it do him not once but twice. And this thing airs at a time when we're talking about, is Aaron Rodgers going to be nice to Jordan Love? Right? We watched Ben Roethlisberger when they drafted a quarterback.
Mahomes said the first text he got after winning the Super Bowl was from Alex Smith. Yeah, saw that on Twitter the other day.
Well, I did not see that, but
yeah, it's just, you can't make this human up.
No, he's everything he's cracked up to be.
It's just an incredible NFL story. It deserves a football life one day.
Yeah, because his football life is wild.
Yeah, it really is.
So if you haven't watched it, go watch it. I mean, it's just pretty awesome.
Fantastic.
Pretty awesome. All right, let us know if you did watch it, what you think of it down in the comments, and go watch another video that we did.